So we got Mike Mercier on the line to give us a very important discussion and understanding of the smartphone addictions that have happened to our society. Please tell us about yourself, your background. Give us a little bit.
Well, thanks, Calvin. I spent a decade in the college textbook industry as an editor and a publisher, and so I got into the whole issue of education through that, and then I've spent the last decade in the market research industry, and several years ago, what's that?
No, you're good.
Okay, so several years ago, I started to notice in myself that I was addicted to my smartphone.
Wow. And
this was unusual for me because I had been someone who, I'd never watched TV, and I didn't really get into, I'd read, in the 90s about people spending hours and hours a day on the internet. I didn't do that. But once I got a smartphone, they had me hooked.
Yeah.
And I tried to limit my use of the phone for a few years, and I couldn't. So I eventually just got rid of the phone. And that sort of gave me some insight into, how addictive these devices are. And then I began to see, the media started to cover this issue, and a lot of people began to talk about it. So I saw an opportunity to start doing research in this area. So I started a nonprofit organization called Screen Education 2 years ago in 2016.
Okay.
So I've done several research studies. I've pulled together some presentations that I've given to different audiences, summer camp audience, school education, K-12 audience. I just this week did a presentation for corporate marketers on this issue, and I'm also going to be speaking to a human resources group. So I'm able to take this understanding since it affects every aspect of society and tailor my discussion and explanation of it to different audiences, different
Wow.
contexts. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So,
Yeah.
in your discoveries, you had chosen to do a particular investigation involving youth at a camp.
Right. And it was really opportunistic,
Okay,
So
okay.
I realized that this was a big issue,
Yeah.
for adults and kids, right?
Yeah.
But I knew because my kids had gone to a couple of local summer camps here in Cincinnati that the summer camps, a lot of them don't allow kids to bring their phones. And
Yeah.
I thought, well,
Yeah.
what are those kids going to be like at the end of, 2 weeks or in some cases 4 weeks without a phone? They
Yeah.
must be losing their minds. So I thought it would be a great way. So they're essentially in the deprivation experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be really interesting to go in and talk to them at the end of the 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks and see what they were going through. So I started to do that. Excuse me. I've done 3 studies with 3 different summer camps so far, and I have a couple planned for this summer. But I was shocked to find just the opposite, that they were actually the experience. There were 2 things. One, it sort of woke the kids up to just how bad these phones are to them. So by going without their phones, they realized things like, face-to-face interaction is really a much better way to get to know people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these kids would say things like, well, I remember one girl said in a focus group I did, she said, you see those 5 boys at the end of the table, I know them really well. And I know all their names, and I guarantee you, if I brought my phone to camp, I wouldn't have talked to them, not once, and I wouldn't know who they are, and couldn't name them, and I wouldn't know anything about them. And and I heard a lot of that. At one of the camps, we asked the kids, okay, you've been at camp for 4 weeks. What would camp have been like if you had been allowed to bring your phone? And we just heard over and over again, well, I would have spent the whole day in my cabin on my phone. I wouldn't have gone out into nature. I wouldn't have, tried these sports or these new activities. I wouldn't have gotten to know people.
Wow.
We'd all be zombies. Nobody would talk to each other. It was just on and on and on about. So the bottom line is, what I'm learning is that at a minimum at an unconscious level, but for some of these kids, they're really aware of it before they even come to the camp. That they're not engaging in life, and it's bothering them. It's bothering them that they're not engaging in life. because
Wow.
of their phones.
Wow.
So, and
That's
there's a lot more that I've learned too, but that's kind of the big picture.
that zombie comment I read in your in one of the pieces of feedback that you were recording,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a child had said that. One of the students said that they were zombies. It would be like zombies if they had brought their phones. It's funny that the narrative of the zombie is so prominent even today. You know, like
I know.
even
I,
like this, we're zombie-esque when we find those people in those engaged in that in that
right,
phone. They're all doing the same thing. They're all cheering and liking the same thing. It's mob
right,
mentality, even on the
right.
internet.
Yeah, and also if for anyone who has teens, I often find sometimes with my kids, it's like I'm waking them up.
Yeah,
If I call, for example, one of my kids, and I can tell when they've just been engrossed in their phone right before I call because it's like they're in a stupor,
you
just
saved
haven't
them
come out
from
of it to
death.
talk to me.
You
Yeah,
saved them from the
yeah,
zombie.
right,
This is the apocalypse.
right.
I mean,
And
yeah,
it's not the point.
yeah,
I just want to be clear that it's the point is not to criticize the kids,
no
right? I
doubt,
mean,
no doubt, yeah.
adults are this way too,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. Anybody
But
involved in the phone.
right, right. So the kids need help, and that's the other thing. What I'm hearing from the kids through the research, to some extent, is they're crying out for help. They a good percentage of them, like I said, realize there's a problem,
Yeah.
and they can't stop because it's an addiction. So I've actually heard. Here's a great example. I've talked to schools. That's another part of my research. I've been talking to schools like teachers and administrators,
Yeah.
and I've talked to a number of schools where they have implemented no phone policies. And what I keep hearing is they basically say the kids seem to be glad that someone is imposing limits. They seem
Ooh.
relieved, right?
There we
And
go.
so
Yeah.
yeah, and I had one young man tell me that he had a friend
Yeah.
who said that he wished his parents would force him to play a sport because then he
Wow.
could get off of his phone. So in other words, this
Wow.
kid really wants to be rescued, right?
Yeah.
He obviously he could sign up for sport himself, but he can't muster the will to do it because he's so addicted to his phone,
Wow.
and he almost wants an outside force to come in and force him. You know what I mean?
Man.
So
They're crying out. So if the children are
yeah,
crying out, then that means the adults are obviously making the same. They just the effort is not there. The addiction is strong. It's like any other addiction.
hmm
And it should be treated as such. Maybe there should be some, not just the
well,
opioid concern. There should be some concern for. Yeah.
yeah, and I think we're starting to. But, I gave a presentation I mentioned to a marketing group, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I laid out was if you look at we're basically at the very beginning of a backlash against this, right? So
Oh
my
yeah.
point is that I think society is going to step up. I think we're at the very beginning of this backlash stage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we look at 2017, there's a narrative there, and the narrative is basically, and if you go back to 2016, that's when we sort of had this official stamp. There were some research studies that found that it's official. The kids are addicted to their phones.
Yeah.
So some organizations did national surveys and said, look, at least half the kids say that they feel addicted to their phones, and it's a problem.
Okay.
And then you go to 2017, and we learned a lot. There was like this explosion in media coverage of this issue, but we learned that Silicon Valley is intentionally designing the apps to be addictive.
Huh. I remember
Yeah,
that.
then we had research. Yeah, Jean Twenge came out with a big study. She's a psychologist at San Diego State,
Yeah.
saying that she looked at all these different surveys that the U.S. government had done over like 25 years and said, in 2012, the year the smartphone hit saturation ownership in the population,
Yeah.
they started to decline on all these measures of mental health like anxiety, depression,
Oh wow.
suicide, yeah, independence from the parents, social things like they're not dating,
Yeah.
that's dropped tremendously.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's that's the narrative. It's like they're addicted. It's intentional. Silicon Valley's trying to do this. It's hurting the kids. But the final nail in the coffin was the revelation in 2017 that Silicon Valley knows it's hurting the kids, but they don't care. Yet many of the executives are protecting their own kids from the problem, right?
Oh wow.
So Yeah, so they give the example of how Steve Jobs didn't let his kids use iPads. The iPads have been out for 2 years, and someone asked him, "Oh, how do your kids like them?" He said, "Well, they've
They
never
don't
tried
touch
it."
them. They
Yeah,
don't even touch them.
right. So that's the narrative,
wow.
right? And
Yeah.
so any society
Wow.
that sees someone coming after its kids to make money and getting them addicted and causing all these problems, but they're protecting their own, you're going to go to war, right? You're going to rise up and go to war against
Yeah.
those forces.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So that's what's happening. I think there's all these public education campaigns that are starting, lobbying lawmakers, putting pressure on the apps developers in Silicon Valley to
You
make
done
the apps
made
less.
me mad. I'm mad now. That means I got children that done touched one of them things. So
Right.
I'm upset, like this is, it's one of those things that, we're probably going to look back in history and find that this is one of those cycles of history repeating itself where some sort of
Right.
technological advancement is the demise of one portion of society for the elevation of the other. But
Right.
it's really, I think we're catching it right now at a wave where we can use this information on this information highway to help
Right.
to limit and restrict this thing instead of using it to destroy us.
Right. I agree with you.
This is
And
amazing.
yeah, and I think and you make a good point, right? So we can. It is beginning. We're recognizing that it's hurting us,
Yeah.
and when people talk about, well, we have to reduce screen time, a lot of people, for some people, the reaction is, well, we need phones, right? And the point isn't to say we're going to get rid of phones or go backwards, right?
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
to say we're going to shut the internet off or get rid of apps or social media. It's the pendulum swinging back and forth. So
Yeah.
we've swung to the right, and we're seeing the problem. So it's going to swing back to the left, and we're going to examine it, try to find out ways to control it and limit it, keep it under control, right, and then
Yeah,
move forward
yeah,
again.
yeah.
I mean, there's no, I don't think there's, this doesn't have to be a black or white, issue in terms of we either use them or we don't use them.
What is
How
it?
do you
What
strike the
what
right
does it
balance?
look like to limit? What does it look
Right.
like to limit technology? Is that's the thing that
Right.
with the discovery of this information, then those who can now it's a cause for restriction of access to information. You see, like it's really it would be a drastic pendulum swing because to limit it,
Right.
would again marginalize another section of people.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And
And if you,
I don't know. I think that's what we don't want to do.
right. I think, most people would agree, right? So I mean, in some ways, Silicon Valley's not going to win this, right? So,
Yeah.
so we learned in the last 2 months, this backlash started like in early January when Apple shareholders sent that open letter to Apple saying, we expect you guys to address this problem, to do research on it, understand it, and then give parents and kids tools to control and limit their use, right?
Yeah.
But Facebook has a new app called it's Messenger. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Something Facebook Messenger, and they developed a kids version, and all these child experts and hundreds of child experts, pediatricians, and child advocacy groups and parents came out and said, please take this off the market because it was targeting kids 6 to 13.
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook said no. Well, they're not going to win this. The backlash is going to continue, I believe, and they can't just be defiant, and ignore the problem. The backlash, I think, will get them. They either won't make money off of it or they'll be forced to change
So
the app.
in a pessimistic mindset, if there is no change, what do you think will result from a continuation of this same pattern?
Well, I mean, anyone else could reason this through too, right? So if there's that whole argument that people make. Well, and it's a good argument. I mean, it's a good historical framework to look at this, right? So it's people say, well, when radio came out, people thought it was going to just, maybe they might have even said it about the telegram, right?
Yeah,
but people say when radio came out, they thought it was going to destroy the fabric of society, and then the same thing with television, on and on, and it didn't, right? So one way to look at this is, well, okay, if there is no backlash, we just we just change, right? It's just part of our normal evolution, which means what? We'll have shorter attention spans, right? I mean, the research is showing the kids are more depressed and less independent. Those are not good measures. So it's not just like people are in this situation, right?
Yeah.
It's not like smartphones just came out and people are screaming and crying that the world is going to end, right?
Yeah.
We're reacting to the actual consequences that we're measuring through research. Everyone sensed it in themselves and in their kids for years.
Yeah.
But in the last year, the research finally caught up with what we sensed intuitively, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate people trying to apply that historical framework and saying this is no big deal.
Yeah.
It really is. So if we don't do anything about it, then we're accepting that people aren't going to, we're going to be less happy, interacting through screens, living in a virtual world instead of engaging in life, doing activities, getting into nature, doing sports, doing well at school, studying, right, learning.
Yeah. Growing.
So
building neural nets, thinking, creating, all those things are going to cease. Yeah.
Exactly.
Artistic expression, any of it.
What's that?
I said the artistic expression, any of it, all of it will be be a continuation of whatever has already existed.
Right, and nobody wants that to stop. Nobody wants that to stop. Like, you see your kid. My daughter was super engaged in doing all kinds of activities. And when she got a phone, it all stopped.
Yeah.
So it's been a struggle, as I know with most parents. I'm not singling her out, but with most parents, it's a struggle to fight this. So.
Yeah. Well, now we have evidence and reason. You know how parents used to say you got to eat your vegetables because they're going to do something good for your body.
Right. And that's a very good point. And that's part of, if you think about how to address this problem, right? And this is sort of the framework that I've developed. It's a three-pronged approach. So the way to address it, what we're seeing right now is the sort of top-down approach, right? So right now we have societal institutions, advocacy groups, parents, schools coming in and saying, to the rescue, right, and saying we're going to impose limits on your screen time. That's what's being talked about now. It's imposing limits from the outside on the kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyone knows that to really really help the kids, that's necessary because they're addicted.
Yeah.
But we have to complement that with helping to develop the kids' consciousness of the problem, right?
Yep.
And the ability to self-limit, because once they get out of an environment like a school where their limits are placed on them and they have to, fend for themselves, if they haven't cultivated that ability to self-limit, where are they going to be, right? So you're right. I actually predict we're going to see, that one of the ways society will kind of change a bit is there'll be a greater emphasis on the values required to limit, right?
Yeah.
To self-limit your use. So we're gonna see kids. It's not going to be like you're talking about eating your vegetables, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be a bad, horrible thing to deprive a kid of a phone and to get them to try to appreciate self-sacrifice and discipline, right?
Yeah.
To cultivate those qualities in themselves.
That in itself will help to change the society and everything.
Right.
What do you think the result of the commerce that is built from the attention that will be lost from the internet? I mean, this is a real, the severity. This impacts a lot of people,
right?
Business,
right?
So
right. It's a good point. Yeah. And so the question is there a creative way? For example, imagine kids. Once kids, I think we're going to educate kids about the fact that these companies are going after them, right? Their game that's being hunted, right?
Yeah.
And the meat that they're trying to skim off their bones is their attention, right?
Yeah.
So once kids, are awoken to this, then I think they might become skeptical of apps and the companies that make them, and they'll be more discerning, and they might demand new apps that have different features, that aren't as addictive, that are maybe, limited in their capability, and they might choose them. So there could be, what I'm getting at here is there could be a shift in the economics here. If someone comes along with an app that's better, You know,
Yeah.
maybe kids aren't going to use it as much, but there'll be a show. I think there'll be new opportunities. In other words, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it stands to reason if people are spending less time on screens, like playing game. Say you're spending less time on a screen playing a game,
Yeah.
and you start playing board games and physical sports and physical activities.
Yeah.
That's going to generate new business opportunities, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there'll be losses and gains.
Yeah.
You know, if this carries out, right? If
Yeah.
this follows through.
It should be. So it is all beneficial. It is helpful for us.
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
this has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Man. So where do we go from here? How do we get more information about how your efforts can be promoted and people can find out what you're doing and we can support you?
Well, people can feel free to contact me personally if they want to. The website is screeneducation.org, and my email address is on the website. And of course, I mean, there are a lot of people, you know, writing about this issue, and I'd recommend two books. One is by Adam Alter. He's a professor at NYU, professor of psychology.
All right.
And he wrote a book called Irresistible. So I'd recommend that one highly. He basically lays out this whole, you know, game that Silicon Valley's playing in terms of designing the apps to be addictive, and he's talked to addiction experts, and he lays the whole thing out for you. And then another excellent book would be Jean Twenge's book, which came out in August of last year, called iGen, IGEN. And she's the one that did all that research that just lays out how all the measures of psychological health have dropped off a cliff for kids.
Wow.
So those are two. Anyone who wants to learn, you know, get a big picture view of this, I would recommend both of those books.